Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1497 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Thursday evening into Friday. And I want to tell you at the top of the podcast, this is part 2 of 2 with my friend Mark Schindler. Part 1 should be available in your podcast feed right now, talking about the Hawks and the NBA draft and what the Hawks should be doing in the NBA draft, more importantly. And again, part 2 right now coming to you. We've covered a lot of ground on this podcast, some of the prospects involved with the Hawks considerations in the next couple of days, as well as some big picture stuff along the way. Mark is fantastic. And again, part 1 available right now, part 2 on the way right now. After the intro, I'll be back with myself and Mark talking about the NBA draft.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
The guy that, this is kind of a spoiler, I guess, but the guy I took, we did this Locked On NBA mock draft like a month ago, and it just came out, which is kind of funny. So a lot of things have changed since then. But I took Dereck Lively for the Hawks at 15, and I admitted on that show that it's kind of contingent on Clint not being here. Like if you have Clint on deck, you probably can't take him. I don't think that you absolutely can't, but I probably wouldn't. But if you assume for a second that they're going to move Clint or think about moving Clint at some point, I think Lively's pretty interesting for me anyway. Pairing with Okongwu, also playing behind him, 7-footer, defense, all that stuff. Number one, do you like Dereck Lively? And is that a reasonable pick for the Hawks given where they are?
Yeah, I think kind of like you said, if they move Clint, then I would get it. To a degree, I think to me, I still would rather see them get more. Like even when you talk about this group having, like the young guys having versatility in the front court, to me, it's much more about at the 4-5 than at the 3-4. Because like DeAndre still, for me, I think he can just be such a negative at the 3 offensively. Just given what his passing is / isn't. And so for me, I think like I really want to see them get somebody who can kind of play 2 through 4, because AJ is the closest they have to that, and I still would say he's kind of just an outright 3 right now.
Yeah, mostly for sure.
So, but like in general, like I think part of what makes it tough too, like it all just depends what happens in free agency and in the offseason too. Because like, okay, well, what if they end up getting in a guy who can kind of play as like a 7th or 8th man? Maybe they move on from Bogey and they move on from Clint, and so you're talking about a different roster that already has a little bit more versatility. I really like Lively. Like I think, I'm probably not as high as some have gotten on him. Like I'm very much in like back in the lottery. So like this to me is not a bad spot. Like I think that the actual rim protection ability on top of his ability to not just play deep drop, like Duke was comfortable putting up close to the level of the screen, and he's just so big and mobile enough and started playing in the right places after really being like his improvement throughout the course of the year was really awesome to watch, because he went from I was like, this guy probably needs to come back for a second year to I would take him in the first round again. And like that was really impressive to watch, because that's a big growth. I think my only issue is like he is so limited offensively. Part of that I think is like just his body. Like he's probably 220 right now at 7'1", 7'2". He probably weighs a little bit more than that, but he looks like 220. He plays like it too. Like he can. Yeah. He can't post somebody up. Like he doesn't have that kind of fluidity and footwork right now. If anybody gets into a center of gravity, which is very high, he's going to miss. He can't really put the ball on the floor right now. So when you're talking about him, like it's very strictly, I will sit in the dunker spot and grab a lob, or I will roll to the basket. And he showed some okay stuff as a passer. Like I think that there's room for him to keep growing in that, but that's more so to say like, I think we're a ways away from him becoming like an okay offensive player, because, again, generally I think there's this idea like, oh, well, if this guy can, he's got the short roll reps, you've seen some of it and he can dunk, like that's not enough. Like you have to be so good at doing those things. Like even like, this is not to take shots at Bam, but like even with Bam in the playoffs, like there were times where if he's not on 10 with his aggression attacking in the pocket, he could gum up the offense. Like that just happened at times. Like, same thing with Draymond. Like there were points and again, like it's different because Live is 7'2". He's not the same level of passer, but that's the point. Like even these guys who are at the apex of being so good at spacing without necessarily being a shooter, you have to be so good at taking advantage of that the defense has to respect you. And again, like he's just really far away from being that, or close to getting to a level, I should say, where he can make it matter. But when you're talking about adding versatility and like, okay, well, if you're starting Onyeka and John Collins front court, or Onyeka and Jalen, who, you know, whatever it ends up being, and you are like, okay, well, we have this change-up punch off the bench, and that could get really interesting in a couple of years. But I think it's more so like, especially for this team being more in a not win now, but like need to be competitive now. I do think it's an imperfect thing, but I could kind of see it.
Yeah, again, I don't want to really get the whole mock draft. It was a long time ago, and the board kind of broke weird. So I was like, okay, I have Lively like a half tier above these guys. I'm just going to take him, and I'll give the caveats and all that stuff. And I don't think that they have to by any means. Like I have him rated a little bit above 15, but it's not like it's a slam dunk because of what you just said. He is limited offensively. I do think that like having him with Trey would be good for him. In general.
Yeah, I should have said like in general, like not to target, not to cut off, but like I think part of what helps, like the idea why I'd be open to Atlanta is if those things happen. Like Trey is the kind of guy that you can play with, and this in theory, because especially, I mean, Quinn has been awesome at obviously, you know, helping develop Rudy Gobert and what that became. Like I think that is like one of the environments where he could hit some of his higher outcomes earlier because he's not going to be like, I think just in general with how much Trey's going to have the ball in his hands and how they theoretically are going to run things. Like I think you can do more with that, but also like when we're talking about the playoffs, which I think is very much where this team obviously wants to get. Also, man, it's so wild to think about the Hawks beat the Heat.
And by the way, convincingly beat them.
Oh, by a lot,
in Miami.
Like, I just thought about that.
It was a wild night, and as you might imagine, I got a lot of questions about that throughout the playoffs. Like, what happened with them? I'm like, look, the Hawks just played really well that night. And the funny thing is, Mark, not to go on the tangent, the Hawks like out physicaled them that night too. They bludgeoned them, and it was like that's not what Miami's supposed to. That's not supposed to happen in Miami. I don't know. Anyway, it's a long time ago, but it happened.
No, exactly. It's just wild to think about. But like, I mean, that's the exact point. Because I think like, okay, well, I think that Lively's going to be. Like, I mean, just we saw the issues with what could happen in the playoffs with Quinn's system, with Rudy. And so, like, I don't know. Like, obviously, I'm skipping steps. It takes time to get there. But it's like the kind of thought process that I have when thinking about him going there potentially.
And that makes perfect sense. It's a first-round pick. It's not crazy high, but there are variables there.
I will say it's high enough that it matters. Like these are the picks. Like not saying you meant otherwise, but I think like these are the picks that you look at when we're talking about like the Washington Wizards and being like, well, how the hell did we get here? Well, we took Jerome Robinson at 13, and we swung and missed on this, and we swung and missed on that, and like, yeah, that stuff adds up. Like I think that the Hawks very much need to hit on this one.
Today's show is brought to you by Birddogs. Birddogs is fantastic, bringing fit, comfort, and versatility to the table with their products. I feel great and comfortable in my own skin when I wear Birddogs gear, and Birddogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg to give you that sculpted look that you're looking for. They fit much better than regular shorts. That happen to be made of a stiff, restricting cotton. Birddogs also fixes that issue by inventing their cloud knit fabric. It looks just like khaki, but also stretches, giving you that slimmer fit without having to sacrifice any kind of movement. They also have anti-sweat wicking fabric to keep you cool and dry all day long. In the end, Birddogs makes awesome products, and you're going to want to check out all of what they have going on at birddogs.com/lockedonnba. When you get there, use the promo code LOCKEDONNBA as well. When you do this, use that code, you get a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every single order with Birddogs. One more time, the place to go is birddogs.com/lockedonnba. I agree, and to the previous regime's credit, they basically didn't miss on a lot of first-round picks. Like you could debate on all of them, but they had a lot of good values from Herter to Collins to AJ and Jalen the last couple of years. Obviously, Amari Spellman didn't go very well, and you could debate how they did, and that Hunter Reddish class didn't go particularly how they wanted it to. But it's been a overall pretty positive track record for this team. But it's obviously a new front office now. I want to bring up a guy who is I've described as boring in a good way, and that's Kris Murray. Going back to your point about guys who are more like in that 2 through 4 range, he's more of a 3-4 at this point. But I've been accused of liking boring players. Mark, I like boring players, generally speaking, boring role players. I like Kris Murray. I'm not saying it'd be sexy. at all, it wouldn't be. I'm sure some fans would probably hate it, but I'd be fine with it at this pick. Is that too early for you? And what do you think of when I ask you about Kris Murray?
I think it's tough because it would really depend who goes here. But like, if we're being blunt, like if I am the Hawks, and let's say like around 15 is where they're at, like okay, it's like Bryce Sensabaugh and Leonard Miller and Kobe Bufkin and like maybe Keontae George are left at 15. And I like Keontae a lot, but I think just by all the things we talked about, I don't think he makes a lot of sense for Atlanta.
I agree.
on
both
but I think I would take Kris Murray. I really like Kris because like I love Leonard Miller. He's one of the guys who I think I've just been high on throughout the year. But again, I think he's somebody who much more like in theory becomes a combo forward, is more of like, I don't like saying project, but like I think he's a lottery guy. But I think for me, Kris is like the perfect pick. Actually, I'll go as far as saying if like we don't have any crazy fall, like if Gradey doesn't fall to 15, if Anthony Black doesn't fall to 15 or something, I think for me, like Kris is the guy I would consider very heavily taking there. Or Jet Howard. I don't know if we're going to talk about Jet.
He was on the list too. I talked about him a little bit with Zach Miller. Was that yesterday with regard to Jet. But no, I didn't know you were going to say that. I've listened to you, Sam, and I know kind of what you think and tag the role and all that stuff. I knew you kind of liked Kris Murray, but I am not surprised that you said that. But I think fans might be surprised because again, I think when I thrown out that I like Kris Murray, the response is usually like, he's okay, and it's like, yeah, I mean, I get why you would think that. But the versatility angle that you brought up before, not that he's a super high ceiling, because look, I don't think Kris Murray is going to be a 10-time All-Star. That's probably not going to happen. There are guys with higher upside, but for what they need and for what he can do, and he's a little bit older, I get that. But yeah, he's pretty high for me on the same way that you just said. If no one unexpectedly falls, he would be in my top 2 or 3 for this pick under that scenario. And I don't know if I feel warmly embraced by you on that comment, Mark. No. But what's the sales pitch? I mean, you saw that nice stuff about, and I agree, but what's the sales pitch for Kris Murray? Like what is he good at? What is he not good at in your mind? And like, what are you looking for when you draft him?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are like, part of what's tough in this year, I feel like a lot of people have looked at Kris and they've been like, oh, well, he's just
fine.
Like a worse version of Keegan. And I'm like, they have some things that are similar, but I think they're very different players. And like, for me, I actually think, I think Kris is more of like when you talk about guys who are combo forwards, it's funny because like when we looked at, and not just to do it off the brothers thing, but I think like we saw it, I'm biased a little bit because I wasn't doing draft coverage then, but like when you look at the Morris brothers, like, okay, Marcus Morris was much more of the 3-4. Markieff was, obviously he came in as more of a straight up 4, but, evolved by the time with Washington to more of a 4-5. And I think when you look at it like that and how both of them are, I think Keegan is more of the power forward leaning brother, and Kris is much more of the small forward leaning brother. That's how I tended to conceptualize it over the last year. Because Kris is just so much better at driving. Like he's way better as a straight line driver. He has a little bit more shake to his handle. I think he's a little bit better at, just staying on balance and how he gets to the rim. Because for Keegan, like, he was able to get there at times, but a lot of the time I thought like you could see, and to be fair, he was a lot better at this in Sacramento. Part of that's their offense. Part of that was his own development, but Kris just had that more for me. And that popped a lot more this year in watching Iowa. I think to the other point, Keegan's a lot better of a shooter than Kris is. Like, I think Kris is better than, shooting 33.5% this year. Part of that is difficulty in what this Iowa squad was. But, I mean, he comes in with some of the same ideas. Like, I think he's a serviceable defender who can grow into a better one as he continues to feel himself out on that end of the floor. He's going to rebound the basketball. He's not a great passer. I think it's sort of in the same vein as Keegan. Like, I think it's more of, okay, this guy can finish plays for us in time. We hope that he can continue them. And I think, again, like with Keegan kind of figuring out how to not just play at one speed all the time, that's going to come with reps and time. And I think for me, Kris is a guy I would bank on for the Hawks because I do think he could come in and play minutes right away. And that's not the most important thing, but I think when you're talking about a guy actually getting the chance to continue to get better and bring something right away, Kris is very much someone who could do that. And I think, again, when we're talking about just having somebody who can attack a closeout and get to the basket for this team matters because I don't mean to keep slandering DeAndre. Like, he does important things, but I think when you're talking about, okay, how can we make that look better or make it more capable for him to play at the 4 in some of these other lineups, I think Kris is a guy who could do that. Because I have more faith in Kris getting to the rim than DeAndre Hunter right now.
Oh, so. For sure. And the versatility angle of it all. And, defensively, people are split on Kris Murray. Not that anyone thinks he's going to be bad, but, there are degrees. Like, I think he'll hold up fine, but is he going to be a plus defender? Like, do you 5 years from now, is he going to be a guy that you describe as a plus defender? Or is he just going to be someone who's just like can hold up and is okay, but is more of like a neutral in your mind?
I think he can get to being pretty good, but I think it ends up more of like he has plusness through being able to hold up in a couple of ways. Like, I think that's kind of how I would look at it. Like, I think that eventually the goal is that he can become pretty solid on switching. I think that generally his off-ball defense is fine. Like, he's not going to be a crazy, rotations guy, but I think he can make the right plays. And I think there's just value in having somebody who is going to make the right plays, even if it's not like flashy or crazy rim protection or anything like that. So I think to me, like, it's less about like being awesome at something and more like he's capable of being pretty solid at a few things, and that matters, and just keeping him on the floor so his offense can shine. So I think I guess it probably grades out as like a C+, B- defender for me eventually is where I would hope. But it's just going to kind of depend for me.
Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. If you've been trying to buy tickets to a big event at the last minute, it can be stressful. Probably not the best idea for your wallet or your emotional state. After all, buy tickets should not be a hassle, and with Gametime, it really isn't. Gametime is the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets for sports, music, comedy, and theater. You can avoid stress, start getting hyped for the fun that you're actually going to have at the event because Gametime has killer deals and the best price guarantee. Summer is here. There are all kinds of events around me in Atlanta. I'm sure there are around you as well. And with Gametime, it can be really easy to find awesome deals. Plus, you can also see the images of where your seat's going to be when you get to the event, and they have protection if your event happens to be canceled. Forget all the months of planning in advance. There are tickets right up to the day of the event at Gametime. The Gametime guarantee also means they go the best possible price. If you find tickets in the same row in the same section for less, you'll be credited 110% of the difference with Gametime. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. You can buy tickets just a matter of seconds, and those tickets will be sent directly to your phone to make things very easy on you. Download the Gametime app right now. Create an account. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account with Gametime. Redeem the promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. I'm going to throw you a curveball and we'll kind of change positions. But you mentioned one of these guys earlier as Keontae George. This is not a direct comparison, but there's 3 or 4 of these guys who are guards. Like, they're not small, but they're not, they're guards. And it's Keontae George. This is in no order. Keontae George, Nick Smith, Kobe Bufkin, and Jalen Hood-Schifino. I go back and forth on all of these guys on some level. I like some more than others in Atlanta and outside of Atlanta. Do any of them appeal to you if you are the Hawks at 15 overall? Because there's at least one that I would probably draft, but there are 2 that I probably wouldn't as the Hawks that I like other places, just not for the Hawks. And I wonder what you think of that kind of pair. Again, they're all different players, but they're all kind of in that combo guard area.
Yeah. See, I would take Keontae higher than this. I love Keontae. I think he's going to be really good. Obviously he had kind of a weird season at Baylor, but I also think he was partially miscast, which made it tough. Like, I don't know if you watched him at IMG at all, but he's one of I'm still, I think, learning how to adapt, how I want to take college and high school tape in stride. What means more to me? What means less? What am I going to do with priors? And I think for me, like, watching Keontae play defense at IMG had me just extremely ecstatic about who he could be. And just at IMG in general. And it's like not like they're playing scrubs. And I think you saw all the flashes too at Baylor. I just think he would be a weird fit for this Hawks team right now. Again, like we're talking about, like, because I think he projects to me as somebody who is a starter. Like, I need him on a starting track. I'm not really, like, I don't know, like, not that should completely prevent a team from drafting, but he's just not what the team needs right now.
Agreed.
And I think some people will just say, draft for whatever, but I think no, like, to me, this team kind of does need to draft for it right now. They can't really mess around with it. like fit and upside, obviously. But I think he'd be the highest I'd be on any of them for here. Maybe I'd go Kobe Bufkin earlier, but I'm just not as high on Kobe Bufkin. And I know you are a Michigan fan, so you
that's okay.
No, okay. I'm just saying you should know about this. Like I think the defensive playmaking is cool. I don't think he's nearly as disciplined defensively. Like he gets this rep as being like, oh, he's going to come in and be a really good defender. And I think like maybe in a couple years
he could be. Yeah.
I think it's a lot more like he shows that he shows his potential offensively a lot. Like I think that there are the flashes of him really being able to do some great things defensively, but I think it's pretty rickety at times. That was, to be fair, a product of Michigan's defense as a whole. But so I'm just like a little bit less high on that. I'm not as high on the shot. I think his decision making overall, when we're talking about a team that I think needs to improve and having guys who can make better decisions, like very much in the same way of like watching Shaedon Sharpe this last year. Kobe loves to have a wide open three and make it a pull up two. And like those are things that I think for the Hawks they can't have. Like that's absolutely killer for what their offense wants to get to. And again, like I think it can get there in time, but it's just not perfect. I'm like, I don't know. This is a tough group for me. I think Nick Smith is probably, if I had to take one of them, it would probably be Nick Smith for them. I still think a lot of the same questions, but I think just like the pure talent upside and what he's capable of doing as an off-ball scorer and not necessarily needing to be a ball dominant guard, like obviously ball dominant, but in different ways, like coming off screens and not necessarily having to start things. I think there's a lot of interest in that. It's a very imperfect group though. I will say I'm not a big JHS guy just in general.
Yeah. I knew that about you actually before. Yeah. As I was asking, I had that popped in my head, but Nick Smith is an interesting one where like, he's a good example of what you were talking about. His high school film versus his college film and what he was able to put on film in college, less impressive, but he was banged up all year. Yeah. So it's tough him and Dereck Whitehead are like the obvious guys who were like, they were not themselves this year. And it's like, okay, how do you take that? Dereck has the active injury concern. Like he just had a surgery. I guess the reports are pretty good on that. But I have trouble with Nick Smith. Like I'm not against taking him. He would be lower on my list, but if you trust the high school film, and I mean, he was a top 5 RSCI guy. Like he's really, so was Dereck. I guess they both were. So it's, that whole group is very interesting and very challenging. I like Jalen Hood-Schifino more than you do, but I also don't like anything about the statistical profile from last year. Like he was so inefficient and, I watched a lot of Michael Woodson in my life as a Hawks person, so I understand a little bit what was going on in Indiana. But it was part of that was him, like part of that was Jalen. So
yeah, I think part of what's tough for me is like I mean you'll probably know this because I said it on the pod that Zach and I did talking about JHS, but like I think his pro comp for me was DeJounte in some ways. Like it's not the same player, but like I think DeJounte was a better athlete than JHS. But both of them have some of the same stuff. Like I think a lot of people will be like, well, JHS struggled to finish at the rim because, he's playing alongside, 2 bigs at sometimes. And granted, Indiana spacing
was bad. Yeah.
Not great.
Yeah.
But at the same point, like he's always been a really bad rim finisher. Like he's just pretty below the rim. Yes, I know he had dunks this last year, but just in watching, like it is clear he's a pretty below the rim athlete. Mm-hmm. I think that he's a good accuracy passer, but I just think what the passes actually are not as impactful as I think the snappiness of them can make them look. Like I think, and this, again, it's not meant to slander DeJounte, but when you look at the season he had with the Spurs, it's just important to know, okay, what are those passes? How are they impacting a defense? Are they like plus passes, like a lot of the passes Trey's making? Or are they like, okay, I'm getting a really good screen, I'm hitting the pocket pass, Jakob Poeltl it's a hook shot. Like, and again, that's not to take, like it is a version of creation, but it is not the same. And I think it's just important to note, like for me at least, I'm just not at all optimistic about his shot. Like I think that, maybe I'm being too biased with priors, but I think just seeing what his overall touch has been throughout his career, because I think it's really easy to get in your head and look at like, oh, well, he hit that floater, shot like 35% on floaters this past year, if I remember correctly. It was around there. It was sub 40s. And it was the same issue, but worse at Montverde. So for me, I just am like, I think that stuff can improve. Like, I think you continue to improve your ability to finish, but I think my issue with him is just much more touch than footwork necessarily, and some of those things. But at the same point, like, he can do some stuff that I really like, and I think defensively he's probably got the best immediate projection out of everyone in that group. So
it's a weird group for sure.
It is a very weird group. I think it's the best way to put it.
And and look, I mean, you talked about it, to bring it full circle. There are a few guys in that, in that wing forward mold, but there are more guards and there are more guys that are not, that are probably going to be in this range. I mean, we even talked about Casey Wallace, and I talked about him with your co-host Zach yesterday. That's a guy who could fall to the Hawks conceivably. He's a similar archetype, different player than a lot of those guys, but it's an interesting group. Is there anybody that we didn't talk about that you want to talk about as a particularly good Hawks fit at 15? Because I mean, Bilal is not going to be there, I don't think. At this point, the helium seems to be out of control. Like, he's going to be going in the top 10, it feels like at this point. Who else did I not ask you about? That's kind of, I mean, I guess Dereck and Jet, but that's kind of it. Everybody else that I had listed, we talked about. Anybody else that you think is more off the, I guess Max Lewis, I don't know.
I'm not a big Max Lewis fan.
I know.
I think Max would be, I think Max would be really tough for me with the Hawks. I think he's really interesting in some places, but I think for this Hawks team, I'm probably not there. Also, just to correct myself, Jalen shot 43% on floaters this year, but I still maybe I'm being too unfair, but it was rather low volume. Like, he took 32. It's not like it was. That's your
Indiana bias showing, Mark.
It might be. I just struggle with.
No, look,
because like there's other, like Jarris Walker is a great example, because and Zach has been all over this, because a lot of people will be like, oh, look at Jarris, his touch is so. He shot below 40% on floaters this year, but like, it does look good when it goes in. But it's just I don't know. That's just my general feel, is that I don't like his floater touch, even though he shot okay on them this year. I'm again watching 2 years of Montverde. It was not pretty.
And that stuff that's where it comes in handy. Look, I always admit I don't watch as much high school as I would like to, just out of time and all that. But when I started watching high school, in addition to college, especially in the one, like, it helps. It just helps. There's no way you can convince me otherwise. If you put someone that only watches a college film versus someone who watches high school and college film in the same player, you're going to have a better perspective watching college, watching high school too, because especially if it's a one and done, like, the sample size is bigger. You just saw what they can do, multiple systems, all that stuff. So it is very helpful to keep that stuff.
I think part of what's going to be interesting too, and like, because I mean, I'm not here to say I'm right. This is just what I think, and I could end up being wrong. Part of what's,
of course,
interesting about this next year is that or seeing how this draft plays out in the next year and changes. Like, I think this is going to be really big in formulating, like, what do I focus on as a scout, and what does stick out to me, and what matters most. And maybe I'll end up feeling like less important about like Pryor is going to be less important, but it's
we'll see.
It's an inexact science for sure.
It is. Before I get you out here, and I promise, any second round sleepers, the Hawks pick at 46. They obviously could move around from there, so I'm not going to tie you. But do you have a guy who is your guy in second round? I know it was Jordan Miller at one point.
Yeah, you beat me to it. I love Jordan Miller. I still think it's ridiculous that he's not getting slotted higher. But no, I think he's really good. Obviously, I think the shot is still a question, but I just am not bought into what everything else that he brings. Who else? I think when we're talking about guys who can maybe do multiple things, play multiple positions, I think the idea of bringing in somebody if let's say Colby Jones fell into the second round.
Speaking of guys I absolutely love, it's breaking my heart to not be able to talk about him on the podcast a lot, because he's in that range where he can't go 15, I don't think, and he's not going to fall to 46. So it's
I just realized how low you guys draft now, so that's probably not going to happen.
But I love him. He's my kind of guy all the way across. It's just that he's kind of in the nether region where the Hawks just have no chance of him unless they trade back or trade up or whatever. But I love him too.
I think if the team feels really confident in developing him out, I actually think Ricky Council could be a really fun pick for you guys.
Arkansas, by the way, for folks at home that don't know who that is.
Ricky Council is like one, like, because going from JHS, like I actually, man, like Ricky's ability, like he was probably the best finisher that wasn't a front court player in college basketball last year. Like just some unreal stuff around the rim. And it wasn't like it was flashy, but also like efficient. The shot obviously was kind of all over the place. He was better off the dribble than off the catch, if I remember correctly. He shows some, like, he's inconsistent defensively, but I think there's stuff there in a smaller role for him. I think he could be a devastating slasher at the next level. And to me, like, that is the kind of player I would love to see them bank on and be like, hey, this guy's going to be an incredible athlete, somebody who we think has a solid feel for the game, can make some secondary plays, and is going to attack the hell out of the basketball when the hell out of the rim when he catches the basketball. Like, I'm very in on that because I think just having guys who are going to make decisions and do it quickly, and like he's, again, somebody who I think can slot in at a couple positions and continue to grow. Like, he's a guy I'd love to see them take a swing on at 46.
Makes sense.
Honestly, though, like, he's sneakily, I think he's somebody who could end up going like late first. Not that I have any intel on that, but
no, I mean,
like, he just feels very much like a guy that I think could wind up doing that.
There's and you know this, there's always one or two picks from like 27 to 30 that are like, whoa, okay, interesting.
I mean, dude, like Chris Livingston apparently has a promise, so anything could happen in this draft.
And while in the safe space that I know we're being recorded on this podcast, your friend and mine, Sam Messini, who you often podcast with, mocked Chris Livingston to the Hawks today at 46. And my eyebrows went about over my head. I haven't talked to Sam. I have no intel on that. I'm just saying, between the promise thing and Sam mocking him there, I was like, Sam, what do you know?
He's tough. I thought he was going to have a better season at Kentucky. Like, I actually, like, genuinely, like, as a college person, I thought
he's talented,
as a high school person, I thought he was going to, like, he actually got better his senior year in high school. I thought he was a lot better his senior year at Oak Hill. It just, nothing went right for him.
It did not go well at Kentucky, but that's and listen, maybe it's a talent bet, and at 46 is like the beginning of the Wild Wild West in the second round, where like everything goes nuts after that every year. So what do you know? I mean, I have no idea. The Hawks last year moved down in the second round and still made a pick with Tyrese, but they moved down and they didn't stick. So staying put in second round is, you can't assume it. So who knows? Mm-hmm. Well, Mark, thank you for all the time you've given me, my friend. I appreciate it. In the middle of this very busy season, I'm sure you have W games to watch or something to do right now. You're always busy, as am I. But where can folks find your work across the board, because you have so many other places to find?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at MG_Schindler. That's where I plug everything and keep it active. Obviously, I work over at Dime with you. I kind of work a little bit everywhere, as you mentioned. So,
indeed,
yeah, Twitter is the best place to find me.
I would recommend doing that. I just confirmed. I thought the Dream played the Sun tonight, and they do. So that's a game that starts in about an hour. It will be interesting stuff there. Anyway, thanks for doing this, Mark. I do appreciate it. As for everybody else, please subscribe to the podcast. We have less than a week until the NBA draft as you're listening to this podcast. So good time to hop on board, and we'll see everybody next time.